The small stealth pod drifted silently through the empty blackness of space. Inside was Commander Ethan Reeves, a man with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. His brown eyes were fixed on the display screen showing the massive Xeraxian battle fleet ahead. The alien ships looked like giant metal insects against the backdrop of stars. Each one was at least 20 times larger than the biggest human ships ever built. Ethan could see the biggest one in the center, the Dominion, his target. The year was 2187 and humans were losing the war badly. The Xeraxian Empire had better technology, more ships and an army that seemed endless. 6 months ago, they had destroyed most of Earth's defense fleet at Proxima Centauri. Since then, human colonies had been falling one by one. New Seattle Colony was hit first, then Mars Base, then the settlements on Europa. Billions of people had died already. Ethan's mind drifted to the memory of his wife Olivia. He could still see her smile, her long red hair and the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed. Then he thought of their daughter Lily, only 6 years old, with her mother's smile and her father's stubbornness. Both of them had been on New Seattle when the Xeraxians attacked. There had been no warning, no chance to escape. One moment the colony was there, the next it was gone. That day, Ethan had lost everything he cared about. Now all he had left was his mission, Operation Last Light. Earth's leaders had realized they couldn't win in a fair fight. Their only hope was to strike at the heart of the enemy in a way they would never expect. The Xeraxians were waiting for a big attack from Earth's remaining ships. Instead, they would face one man with a simple goal: upload a special computer virus into their main ship. Distance to target, 5 kilometers, the computer's voice said. Breaking the silence inside the pod, Ethan took a deep breath and began final preparations. He checked his stealth suit, making sure every part worked correctly. The black material covered him from neck to feet and would hide him from Xeraxian sensors. Next, he checked his weapons, a pulse pistol for close fighting and a vibro knife for silent kills. In his backpack was the most important item, a small computer device holding the virus. Earth's best computer experts had worked day and night to create this virus. The Xeraxians used a hive mind system to control their ships. All commands came from the Dominion through special communication channels. If the virus worked, it would break this connection and leave the Xeraxian ships unable to fight together. That's when the small human resistance fleet hiding in the Kuiper Belt would attack. Ethan knew his chances of success were slim. No human had ever set foot on a Xeraxian ship and lived to tell about it. What little they knew about the inside of the ships came from damaged ones they had found. The Xeraxians had 6 limbs, hard outer shells like insects, and were about 7 feet tall. They could see in spectrums humans couldn't and communicated through clicks, electromagnetic pulses and smells. Distance to target, 1 kilometer, the computer said. Ethan put on his helmet, completing the stealth suit. The small screen inside showed him what was outside and kept track of his vital signs. His heart was beating fast, but his hands were steady. Years of training had prepared him for this moment. Preparing for silent approach, Ethan said as he turned off the pod's main engines. Only small thrusters were working now, guiding the pod to the bottom side of the Dominion where sensors were weakest. The pod looked like space junk from the outside, just another piece of debris floating in space. The Xeraxians were careless about such things, seeing them as too small to be a threat. As the pod got closer to the massive ship, Ethan could see more details. The Dominion was not just a ship. It was a moving city in space. Lights flickered across its surface like stars. Parts of it seemed to pulse as if the ship itself was alive. Some people said the Xeraxians grew their ships rather than built them, using some kind of living metal that could repair itself. Contact in 30 seconds, the computer warned. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. In his mind, he saw Olivia and Lily one last time. "I'm doing this for you," he whispered. "For everyone we lost." The pod touched the hull of the Dominion with a soft thud. Magnetic clamps activated automatically, securing it to the alien ship. Ethan waited, holding his breath. If the Xeraxians had detected the pod, alarms would sound and he would be dead in minutes. But nothing happened. The massive ship continued its slow movement through space, unaware of the human parasite now attached to it. Phase 1 complete, Ethan said quietly. He took out his cutting tool and began working on the hull. The tool used a concentrated energy beam to melt through the strange biometal of the ship. It was slow work and he had to be careful not to trigger any internal sensors. Sweat formed on his forehead as he worked, but the suit absorbed it quickly. After 20 minutes of careful cutting, he had made a hole just big enough for him to squeeze through. Before entering, he checked his oxygen levels and the small radiation detector on his wrist. Both showed safe readings. The virus device was secure in his backpack and his weapons were ready to use. Ethan took one last look at the stars through the pod's small window. Somewhere out there was Earth, waiting for him to complete his mission. Somewhere out there were the souls of everyone he had lost. With a final deep breath, he pushed himself through the hole and into the Dominion. The inside of the ship was nothing like he had expected. Instead of the cold metal corridors humans used in their ships, he found himself in what looked like a living organism. The walls pulsed with a faint blue light. The floor felt slightly soft under his boots, as if he was walking on something halfway between metal and flesh. The air was breathable but had a strange sweet smell that made him slightly dizzy. Ethan checked his wrist computer, which showed a basic map of the ship based on intelligence gathered from damaged Xeraxian vessels. The central command system should be at the heart of the ship, several levels up from his current position. Getting there would mean moving through populated areas where Xeraxian crews worked and lived. He moved silently through the dim corridor, every sense alert for danger. His suit would hide him from sensors, but it couldn't make him invisible to the naked eye. If a Xeraxian saw him, the mission would be over before it began. The corridor opened into a larger space that seemed to be some kind of maintenance area. Strange tools hung on the walls and pipes ran across the ceiling carrying unknown fluids. Ethan pressed himself against the wall as he heard a clicking sound approaching. A moment later, a Xeraxian worker entered the room. It was the first time Ethan had seen one of the aliens up close. The creature stood about 7 feet tall with 6 limbs, 2 used for walking and 4 that seemed designed for fine manipulation. Its body was covered in a hard, greenish-brown exoskeleton that shimmered slightly in the dim light. The head had no visible eyes, just a series of sensory pits that Ethan knew could detect heat, movement, and electromagnetic fields. The Xeraxian moved to a control panel on the wall and began manipulating it with 2 of its upper limbs. It made a series of clicking sounds that might have been talking to itself or to the ship. Ethan stayed perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. The creature was less than 10 feet away from him. After what seemed like an eternity, the Xeraxian finished its work and left the room. Ethan let out a silent breath of relief. He checked his wrist computer again and continued moving toward the central sections of the ship. The clock was ticking. The small resistance fleet would begin their attack in exactly 23 hours. By then, he needed to be at the central command node with the virus uploaded. Breach complete, he whispered to himself as he moved deeper into the massive ship. Phase 1 initiated. Ethan moved through the strange corridors of the Dominion like a shadow. The inside of the ship was like a maze with twisting passages that sometimes changed shape as he watched. The walls seemed almost alive with a soft blue glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. He kept his back to the wall and checked every corner before moving forward. His stealth suit kept him hidden from the ship's sensors, but it would not hide him from the eyes of a Xeraxian guard. After an hour of careful movement, Ethan found a small maintenance shaft that ran between the main corridors. It was tight and he had to crawl on his hands and knees, but it was safer than the open hallways. The shaft was warm and the air was thick with a sweet smell that made his head feel light. He paused to check his oxygen levels on his wrist computer. The readings were normal, but something in the air of the Xeraxian ship was different from what humans were used to. As Ethan crawled through the shaft, he could hear the sounds of the Xeraxians moving in the corridors below. Their hard legs made clicking noises on the floor, and they communicated with a mix of chirps and electronic buzzing. His translator could pick up some of their words, but most of it was too complex for human technology to understand. After another hour of slow movement, Ethan reached a junction in the maintenance shaft. His map showed that he needed to go up 3 levels to get closer to the central command system. He found a vertical shaft that seemed to connect the levels and began to climb. The walls of the shaft were covered in a strange material that felt both slippery and sticky at the same time, making the climb difficult. Sweat ran down his face inside his helmet as he pulled himself up foot by foot. When Ethan reached the 3rd level, he stopped to rest and drink water from the small tube in his helmet. His muscles ached, but he could not stop for long. The clock was ticking and he had less than 20 hours before the human fleet would launch their attack. He checked his wrist computer again to make sure he was going in the right direction. The maintenance shaft on this level was different. It was wider and the blue glow was brighter. Ethan could move more easily here, but that also meant that Juraxian workers might use these passages too. He moved carefully, checking for any signs of movement ahead. After a few minutes, he heard a strange sound coming from a side passage. It was different from the usual Juraxian communication, almost like a sad song. Curious, Ethan moved toward the sound, keeping his hand on his pulse pistol. He reached a small opening in the wall of the shaft that looked down into a large chamber below. What Ethan saw made him pause. The chamber was filled with Juraxians, but they were not working or moving around. They stood in a circle around what looked like a dead Juraxian laid out on a raised platform. The dead alien's shell was dull and its limbs were stiff. The other Juraxians were making that strange singing sound and touching the dead one with their upper limbs. Ethan realized he was watching some kind of funeral or mourning ceremony. The Juraxians were saying goodbye to one of their own. This was not what human propaganda had told him to expect. The military had described the Juraxians as mindless bugs who only wanted to destroy and conquer. But what Ethan was seeing looked like real emotion and respect for the dead. He watched for a few more minutes, feeling confused. These aliens had killed his family and billions of other humans. They had destroyed Earth's colonies without mercy, but here they were mourning their dead just like humans would. It made him wonder what else the military had been wrong about. Ethan shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. He could not afford to get distracted. His mission was clear, and the lives of the remaining humans depended on him. He moved away from the opening and continued down the main shaft. Soon Ethan reached another opening that looked down into what seemed to be a control room. Several Juraxians were working at stations that glowed with strange symbols and moving patterns. One wall of the room was covered in a large display showing the position of the Juraxian fleet. Ethan could see hundreds of ships moving in formation with the Dominion at the center. More importantly, he spotted a data terminal that was not being used. If he could access that terminal, he might be able to download a map of the ship and find the quickest way to the central command node. But to reach it, he would have to leave the safety of the maintenance shaft and enter the control room. Ethan watched the room for 10 minutes, noting the patterns of movement. There were 5 Juraxians in the room, but 2 of them left after a few minutes. The remaining 3 were focused on their work and had their backs to the terminal he needed. It was a risk, but one he had to take. He carefully removed the panel covering the opening and slipped down into the shadows at the edge of the control room. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady as he moved from shadow to shadow. The Juraxians did not turn around as he approached the unused terminal. When he reached it, Ethan connected his wrist computer to the Juraxian system. He had to work quickly. The virus he carried had a secondary function that let him access basic ship systems. Lines of alien code flowed across his small screen as the device translated and downloaded information. Suddenly, one of the Juraxians made a loud clicking sound and turned around. Ethan froze his hand on his pulse pistol. If the alien saw him, he would have to shoot, and that would alert the entire ship to his presence. But the Juraxian was only speaking to one of its companions and did not look in Ethan's direction. After a tense moment, the alien turned back to its work. Ethan let out a slow, silent breath as his computer finished downloading. He now had a detailed map of the ship, including the security systems around the central command node. The download also gave him information about Juraxian patrol schedules and access codes for certain doors. This would make his mission much easier. He disconnected from the terminal and slipped back into the shadows. Just as he was about to climb back into the maintenance shaft, the main door to the control room slid open. 2 Juraxian guards entered, escorting a human prisoner between them. Ethan almost gasped in surprise. The prisoner was a woman with short blonde hair wearing what looked like a science uniform from Europa Station. Her face was bruised and she looked tired, but she walked with her head held high. The Juraxian guards clicked at the others in the room and then continued through another door, taking the woman with them. Ethan quickly climbed back into the maintenance shaft, his mind racing. He had not expected to find another human on the ship. According to his briefing, all prisoners were taken to processing centers on captured colonies, not brought aboard military vessels. Who was this woman and why was she here? He checked his map and saw that the door the guards had used led to a section marked as research labs. His mission was to reach the central command node. But he could not just leave another human in Zraxian hands. If she was a scientist, she might also have valuable information about the enemy. Ethan faced a difficult choice: follow his original mission plan or try to rescue the human prisoner. Both paths were dangerous, but the sight of another human had stirred something in him. After months of loss and fighting, it was a reminder of what he was fighting for. He made his decision and began moving through the maintenance shaft, following the direction the guards had taken. The central command node was his primary objective, but he would try to learn more about this prisoner first. Maybe there was a way to complete his mission and save her too. As Ethan crawled through the narrow passage, he checked his weapons and stealth systems. Whatever he decided to do next would be risky. The fate of humanity still rested on his shoulders, but now there was another life at stake too. Ethan followed the path the guards had taken with the human prisoner. The maintenance shafts in this section of the ship were narrower and hotter than before. He had to move slowly to avoid making noise that might alert nearby Zraxians. According to his new map, the research labs were just ahead. Ethan reached a small vent that looked down into a wide corridor and waited. After a few minutes, the two Zraxian guards returned, but the human woman was not with them. They clicked to each other as they walked away, their hard shells gleaming under the blue lights. When they were gone, Ethan carefully removed the vent cover and dropped down into the corridor. His stealth suit would hide him from sensors, but he still needed to move quickly. He found the door to the research labs and used one of the access codes he had downloaded. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a large room filled with strange equipment. Some of it looked like medical devices, while other machines had purposes Ethan could not guess. At the far end of the room, he saw the human woman. She was alone, sitting on what looked like an examination table. Ethan moved quietly toward her, keeping his pulse pistol ready. When he was just a few feet away, the woman suddenly looked up and saw him. Her eyes widened, but before she could make a sound, Ethan raised his finger to his lips in the universal sign for silence. She nodded slowly. "I'm Commander Ethan Reeves, United Earth Defense Force," he whispered as he approached her. "I'm here on a mission, but I can help you too." "Susan Morgan," she replied in a low voice. "I was chief xenobiologist on Europa Station before it fell. They've been keeping me here for 3 months." Ethan was surprised. Europa Station had been destroyed just like New Seattle, or at least that's what they had been told. "Why did they take you prisoner?" he asked as he checked the door to make sure no guards were coming. "They wanted my knowledge of human biology," Susan explained. "But I've learned much more from them than they've learned from me." Ethan helped her off the table. She was weak but could walk. "We need to move fast," he said. "Is there somewhere safe we can talk?" Susan pointed to a small storage room connected to the main lab. "The guards won't be back for at least an hour," she said. They slipped into the storage room and Ethan closed the door behind them. "What kind of mission are you on?" Susan asked, looking at his stealth suit and weapons. Ethan hesitated but decided to trust her. "Operation Last Light. I'm here to upload a virus into the Zraxian Central Command System. It will disrupt their hive mind communication and leave their fleet vulnerable to attack." To his surprise, Susan did not look relieved or happy. Instead, her face showed concern. "You can't do that," she said firmly. "What?" "Why not?" "Because the Zraxians aren't what we think they are," Susan said. "They're not mindless killers. They're refugees, Commander." Ethan stared at her, not understanding. "Refugees? They destroyed our colonies, killed billions of our people. How can you call them refugees?" Susan sat down on a storage container and took a deep breath. Their home system was destroyed by something they call the Devourer. It's some kind of cosmic phenomenon that consumes everything in its path. They've been running from it for centuries, moving from galaxy to galaxy. "That doesn't justify genocide," Ethan said, thinking of Olivia and Lily. "No, it doesn't," Susan agreed. "But the attacks weren't ordered by their civilian leadership. After their last emperor died, the military caste took control. They're called the Hive Generals, and they rule through fear and control of information." Ethan remembered the mourning ceremony he had witnessed earlier. It had seemed so human, so unlike the monsters he had been told about. "How do you know all this?" "I've spent months learning their language and studying their culture," Susan explained. "Not all Zraxians support the war. There's a growing resistance movement led by a philosopher named Vexitar. They want peace with humans. They believe we can coexist." This information shook everything Ethan thought he knew. His mission suddenly seemed less clear. The virus he carried wouldn't just disable ships, it would kill millions of Zraxians by shutting down life support systems across the fleet. If what Susan was saying was true, many of those deaths would be innocent civilians. I need to complete my mission, Ethan said, but his voice lacked conviction. The human resistance fleet is waiting for my signal. Without it, they'll be destroyed. There has to be another way, Susan insisted. If we could reach Vextar and the resistance, maybe we could forge an alliance. Humans and Zraxians working together against the real enemies, the Hive generals. Ethan checked his chronometer. He had less than 18 hours before the resistance fleet would launch their attack. He faced an impossible choice: follow his orders and potentially kill millions of innocent Zraxians, or take a chance on Susan's information and try to find another solution. Where can we find this Vextar? He finally asked. The knowledge chambers 3 levels down, Susan replied with hope in her eyes. But we'll need to be careful. The Hive generals run security scans every 20 minutes. Ethan nodded grimly. Lead the way, Dr. Morgan. But if this goes wrong, I'm completing my original mission no matter what. They left the storage room, carefully checking that no one was in the lab. Susan knew the patrol schedules better than Ethan did, having been on the ship for months. She led him to a service lift that was rarely used by the Zraxians. Their society is divided into castes, Susan explained as they waited for the lift. Workers, soldiers, engineers, and so on. Each caste has its own area on the ship, and they rarely mix. The Hive generals use this to maintain control. The lift arrived and they stepped inside. It was designed for Zraxians, so the controls were higher than normal for humans. Susan had to stretch to reach the panel that would take them down to the knowledge chambers. Why did they keep you alive? Ethan asked as the lift began to move. Most humans captured by Zraxians were never seen again. They value knowledge above almost everything else, Susan said. When they realized I was a scientist, they decided I might be useful. I've been pretending to cooperate while learning everything I could about them. The lift stopped suddenly between floors. Red lights began flashing and a harsh alarm sound filled the small space. Susan's face went pale. Security scan, she whispered. They must have detected the lift moving on an unauthorized path. Ethan pulled out his pulse pistol. How many guards will they send? At least 4, maybe more, Susan replied. We need to get out of here. Ethan looked up at the ceiling of the lift. There was a maintenance hatch that might lead to the shaft. He holstered his pistol and jumped up, grabbing the edges of the hatch. With a strong pull, he opened it and pulled himself up. Come on, he said, reaching down for Susan. She took his hand and he pulled her up into the dark lift shaft. Just as they closed the hatch behind them, the lift began moving down again. They're bringing it down to check it, Susan whispered. We need to climb. The walls of the shaft had maintenance rungs meant for Zraxian workers. They were spaced far apart, making the climb difficult for humans. Ethan went first with Susan following close behind. They had climbed about 20 feet when the lift stopped below them and the doors opened. They could hear the clicking sounds of Zraxian guards entering the lift. Don't move, Ethan whispered. The Zraxians had better hearing than humans and might detect them if they made any noise. They hung motionless on the rungs as the guards searched the lift below. After what seemed like an eternity, the doors closed again and the lift continued downward. That was close, Susan said quietly. The knowledge chambers are 2 levels down from here. There's an access point from this shaft, if I remember correctly. They continued climbing down, passing 1 level, before stopping at a maintenance door built into the shaft wall. Susan pointed to it. That should lead to a service corridor near the knowledge chambers. Ethan opened the door carefully and they slipped through into a narrow, dimly lit corridor. The air here smelled different, more like old books and less like the sweet scent that filled the rest of the ship. They moved quietly along the corridor until they reached its end, where a large, ornate door stood. The knowledge chambers, Susan whispered. Vextar should be inside. He spends most of his time here studying ancient texts. Ethan checked his weapons one last time and made sure the virus device was secure in his pack. Let's hope your philosopher friend is as interested in peace as you think he is, he said. Otherwise, we just walked into a trap. Susan placed her hand on the door's control panel. There's only one way to find out, she said as the massive door began to slide open. The massive door slid open, revealing a sight that took Ethan's breath away. The knowledge chambers were unlike anything he had ever seen before. The room was huge, like a cathedral, with a ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. Instead of the blue glow that filled the rest of the ship, this place was lit with a soft golden light. The walls were lined with what looked like living data structures that resembled coral reefs glowing and pulsing with information. Dozens of Zraxians moved through the chamber, their upper limbs touching, the living data systems directly. They seemed to be reading or studying the information stored there. None of them paid any attention to the door opening as if human visitors were a normal thing. They're too absorbed in their studies to notice us, Susan whispered. The knowledge caste is the least concerned with the war. They care only for learning. Ethan kept his hand near his pulse pistol as they entered the chamber. Where's Vexitar? He asked, scanning the room for threats. This way, Susan said, leading him toward a quieter section of the vast room. He usually works in the historical archives. They moved carefully between groups of studying Xeraxians. Up close, Ethan could see that each alien was slightly different. Their shells had various patterns and colors that he had not noticed before. Some had markings that seemed to indicate rank or caste. Susan led him to a secluded area where a single Xeraxian was working alone. This one was larger than the others, with distinctive blue markings on its shell. What made it stand out most were the intricate patterns etched into its carapace like writing or symbols. That's Vexitar, Susan said quietly. The marks on his shell show he's a philosopher. The military tried to wipe out that caste centuries ago, but some survived in secret. As they approached, Vexitar looked up from his work. His compound eyes studied them for a moment before he spoke. His voice came through Ethan's translator as a deep, resonant sound. Dr. Morgan, I did not expect to see you again so soon, Vexitar said. And you bring a warrior to our sacred chambers. This is unexpected. This is Commander Ethan Reeves, Susan explained. He's here on a mission, but I've told him about you and the resistance. He might be willing to help us instead. Vexitar's compound eyes turned to study Ethan. A human warrior within the Dominion. Your species continues to surprise us with its adaptability. I came here to end this war, Ethan said bluntly. One way or another. Please sit. Vexitar gestured to what looked like sitting platforms nearby. We have much to discuss and little time if you were detected entering this place. Ethan remained standing, but Susan sat on one of the platforms. Tell him what you told me, she urged Vexitar, about your history, your real history. Vexitar's upper limbs made a gesture that Ethan's translator indicated was similar to a human sigh. My people were not always conquerors, Commander Reeves. For most of our history, we were explorers, scientists, artists. We built great cities and studied the universe around us. The alien touched one of the data structures and images appeared in the air between them. Ethan saw beautiful spiral cities floating in space and strange but elegant works of art. Then the Devourer came. Vexitar continued. A quantum anomaly that consumed everything in its path. Our scientists could not stop it, our weapons could not harm it. We had no choice but to flee in our generation ships. More images appeared showing a dark, spreading emptiness consuming stars and planets. Ethan had never seen anything like it. The trauma of becoming refugees changed us, Vexitar explained. In our fear and desperation, the military caste grew stronger. They promised safety through strength and conquest. When our last emperor died 3 centuries ago, they seized complete control. The Hive General, Susan added. Yes, Vexitar confirmed. They rule through the control of information. Most of my people believe the lies they tell that every species we encounter wishes to destroy us, that we must conquer or be conquered. Ethan thought about the mourning ceremony he had witnessed. But not everyone believes them, he said. No, many of us remember the old ways. We believe peaceful coexistence is possible, even necessary. The Devourer still exists, still pursues us across the galaxies. No single species can face it alone. Ethan took out the virus device from his pack. My mission was to upload this into your central command system. It would disrupt your fleet's communication and leave you vulnerable to attack from our remaining ships. Vexitar studied the device. A clever strategy. Our ships depend on constant communication with the Dominion. But the virus wouldn't just affect military systems, Susan explained. It would shut down life support across the fleet. Millions would die, most of them civilians. Ethan put the device back in his pack. Is there another way? Could this virus be modified to target only military systems? Vexitar's compound eyes flickered with interest. It might be possible, but we would need access to the central neural hub. No outsider has ever reached it. It's guarded by the Praetorian caste, our most elite warriors. Susan took the device from Ethan's pack and examined it. With Vexitar's help, I could reconfigure this to target only the military network. It would free the civilian ships from the Hive General's control without harming innocent Xeraxians. A plan began to form in Ethan's mind. not to destroy the Zraxian fleet but to free it from its military leadership. If successful, they could end the war without further genocide on either side. But they would need to act quickly. The human resistance fleet would launch their attack in less than 15 hours. "Where is this neural hub?" Ethan asked. Vextar touched the data structure again and a map appeared showing the layout of the Dominion. "Here at the very center of the ship. It is where the 6 Hive generals connect directly to the fleet's communication network. They are most vulnerable while connected. Their consciousness exists partially within the network. If we upload the modified virus while they're connected, what would happen to them?" Ethan asked. "They would be trapped within the network," Vexitar explained. "Unable to disconnect while I could use the civilian channels to broadcast the truth to all ships." Ethan studied the map. The neural hub was still several levels away, through heavily guarded sections of the ship. Getting there would be difficult, perhaps impossible. But if they succeeded, they might save millions of lives on both sides. "Can you contact the Resistance?" he asked Vextar. "We'll need help to reach the hub." "I can, but it will take time to gather them without alerting the Praetorians." Ethan checked his chronometer. "We don't have much time. My people will attack soon thinking I've completed my mission." "Can you contact them?" Susan asked. "Tell them to wait?" Ethan shook his head. "My communication system can only send the predetermined signal that the virus is uploaded. I can't send any other message." Suddenly alarms began blaring throughout the knowledge chambers. Red lights flashed and a harsh voice spoke in the Zraxian language. Vextar's posture changed instantly. "We've been discovered," he said urgently. "The Praetorians know outsiders have infiltrated the Dominion." The other Zraxians in the chamber began moving quickly, some hiding data structures, others heading for exits. None of them seemed interested in capturing the humans. "They're not loyal to the Hive generals," Susan explained, seeing Ethan's confusion. "But they won't fight either." "We must move quickly," Vexistar said, leading them toward a hidden door at the back of the chamber. "I know a path to the neural hub through maintenance tunnels. Some of my followers will meet us along the way." As they reached the door, it slid open, revealing 4 Praetorian guards, their shells a deep red color with black markings. Each carried what looked like energy weapons in their upper limbs. They clicked in surprise at seeing 2 humans and Vextar together. Without hesitation, Ethan drew his pulse pistol and fired. The first guard fell, but the others raised their weapons. Vextar moved with surprising speed for his size, knocking one guard down with his powerful limbs. Susan grabbed a piece of equipment from a nearby table and threw it at another guard, distracting it long enough for Ethan to shoot it. The last guard fired its weapon. A beam of energy hit the wall next to Ethan's head, melting the strange material instantly. Ethan rolled to the side and fired twice more, bringing down the final guard. "There will be more coming," Vexitar warned as he checked the tunnel beyond the door. "The hub is 5 levels up. We must hurry." Ethan grabbed one of the fallen guard's weapons. It was designed for a Zraxian with 6 limbs, but he could manage it with both hands. He handed his pulse pistol to Susan, who took it with a grim nod. "Lead the way," Ethan said to Vextar, "and let's hope your Resistance friends show up soon." They entered the maintenance tunnel as the sounds of more Praetorians approaching echoed through the knowledge chambers behind them. The path ahead would be dangerous, but for the first time since starting his mission, Ethan felt something he had not expected to feel again. Hope. The journey to the central neural hub became a desperate battle. Ethan, Susan, and Vexitar moved through narrow maintenance tunnels that wound through the massive ship. Red alarm lights flashed everywhere, and the harsh sound of Zraxian war calls echoed through the passages. They had to stop often to hide from patrols of Praetorian guards searching for them. "We're still 3 levels below the hub," Vexistar said, as they paused to catch their breath in a small storage room. "The security will get tighter the closer we get." Ethan checked the Zraxian weapon he had taken. Its energy cell was half depleted. "How much time do we have?" he asked Susan. She looked at the small device in her hands. She had been working on modifying the virus whenever they stopped. "The human fleet will attack in less than 5 hours. I need at least 20 minutes with the hub systems to upload this correctly." "And the Hive generals?" Ethan asked Vextar. "Will they be connected to the network?" "They connect for exactly 30 minutes every 6 hours, the Zraxian philosopher explained. "The next connection period begins in just under 2 hours." Ethan nodded grimly. Their timing would have to be perfect. They needed to reach the hub, modify the virus, and upload it, while the generals were connected. If they succeeded, the military command structure would collapse and Vexitar could broadcast the truth to the civilian ships. If they failed, the human fleet would be destroyed and the war would continue. "We should keep moving," Susan said, putting the virus device back in a secure pocket. "The longer we wait, the more guards they'll have looking for us." They left their hiding place and continued upward. At the next junction, they met 3 Xeraxians waiting for them. Ethan raised his weapon, but Vexitar made a quick gesture. "They are with me," he explained. "Part of the resistance." The new Xeraxians had blue and green markings on their shells. One was clearly a worker caste, one seemed to be an engineer, and the third had markings Ethan did not recognize. They clicked rapidly to Vexitar in their language. "They say the Praetorians have set up blockades on all main routes to the hub," Vexitar translated, "but they know another way through the power distribution system." The engineer Xeraxian led them to a large vertical shaft filled with pulsing energy conduits. The shaft stretched upward farther than Ethan could see. The air hummed with power and occasional arcs of energy jumped between the conduits. "We must climb," Vexitar said. "The energy field will hide our life signs from sensors, but we must not touch the conduits. A single contact would be fatal." The climb was dangerous and difficult. The maintenance rungs were widely spaced and designed for Xeraxian limbs. Several times Ethan nearly lost his grip as sweat made his hands slippery. Susan struggled even more, having been a prisoner for months with little exercise. One of the resistance Xeraxians helped her, climbing below and supporting her when needed. They had climbed for almost 30 minutes when they heard clicking sounds from above. A patrol of Praetorians was crossing a walkway that intersected the shaft. Everyone froze, clinging to the rungs as the red armored guards passed overhead. When the patrol was gone, they continued upward. Finally, they reached a maintenance hatch that, according to their Xeraxian guides, would lead to a service. Corridor 1 level below the neural hub. Ethan went through, first checking that the corridor was clear before helping the others. "We're close now," Vexitar said, "but the final level will be heavily guarded. The Hive generals never leave the hub. They depend on the Praetorians for protection." The engineer Xeraxian worked on a nearby control panel and brought up a schematic of the level above. It showed at least 20 Praetorian guards stationed around the hub entrance. "Too many to fight," Ethan said, studying the display. "We need a distraction." The worker caste Xeraxian clicked rapidly and made gestures that Ethan's translator couldn't follow. Vexitar nodded in agreement. "Lenva suggests creating a false alarm in the opposite section," Vexitar explained. "He can access the environmental controls and simulate a hull breach. Most of the guards would respond to that emergency." "Will they fall for that?" Susan asked. "The Praetorians are not known for their intelligence," Vexitar said with what might have been a Xeraxian version of a smile. "They follow protocols without question. They put the plan into action." The worker Xeraxian and the engineer went to a control room nearby, while Ethan, Susan, Vexitar, and the third resistance member waited near the access ladder to the hub level. After a few minutes, alarms began blaring again, but with a different tone than before. The schematic showed most of the red dots representing guards moving away from the hub entrance now, Vexitar said. They climbed the ladder quickly and emerged into a wide corridor with high ceilings. The walls here were a deep purple color and seemed to pulse with power. At the end of the corridor stood a massive door with intricate patterns carved into its surface. Only 4 Praetorian guards remained at the door. Before they could react, Ethan fired his captured weapon, hitting one guard in the center of its body. The other resistance Xeraxian attacked another guard while Vexitar charged the third. Susan fired Ethan's pulse pistol at the fourth but missed. The battle was brief but violent. Ethan took a glancing hit from an energy weapon that burned through his stealth suit and scorched the skin beneath. He ignored the pain and continued firing. When it was over, all 4 guards were down, but the resistance Xeraxian was badly wounded, green fluid leaking from its damaged shell. "Stay with him," Vexitar told Susan as he moved to the hub door. "We need to hurry. The Hive generals will begin connecting to the network soon." Vexitar placed his upper limbs on the door's control panel. The intricate patterns on the door began to glow, matching the patterns on Vexitar's shell. "The hub security recognizes philosopher caste patterns," he explained. "The generals never removed this feature, believing all philosophers were extinct." The massive door slid open, revealing the neural hub beyond. Ethan had expected more technology, more machines, but what he saw was stranger and more organic than anything he had imagined. The hub was a circular chamber with a high domed ceiling. In the center stood 6 pod-like structures arranged in a circle. Each pod was connected to the ceiling and floor by thick pulsing cables that looked more like veins than wires. Inside each pod, floating in a clear fluid, was a Jiraxian larger than any Ethan had seen before. These were the hive generals, their shells a deep black, with red patterns that seemed to move and shift. From each general's head extended dozens of thin filaments that connected to a central pillar rising from the center of the circle. The pillar glowed with the same blue light that filled the rest of the ship but pulsed with a faster rhythm. "They're already connected," Vextar said urgently. "We must act now while they cannot disconnect from the network." Susan moved to a control panel near the door and connected her virus device.
"I need a few minutes to modify the
virus to target only the military channels," she said, her fingers working quickly. Ethan took up position by the door, watching for any guards that might have escaped their distraction. Vextar moved to another control panel and began working with his upper limbs moving in complex patterns. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked. "Preparing the civilian channels," Vextar replied. "When the military network is isolated, I will broadcast the truth to all ships. Many will resist at first, but seeing the generals trapped will convince most." Susan worked frantically on her device. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she reconfigured the virus. "Almost done," she said. "Just need to set the target parameters." Suddenly, the main alarm changed tone again. "They've discovered our distraction," Vexatar warned. "The remaining guards will be returning. How much longer?" Ethan asked Susan. "Just a few more seconds," she replied, not looking up from her work. "There, I think it's ready." She pressed a final control and the virus began uploading into the system. On the central pillar, the blue light flickered and turned purple, then back to blue. The hive generals in their pods began to move their limbs, twitching as if in pain or surprise. "It's working," Vexatar said, watching readings on his control panel. "The military network is being isolated. The generals are trapped in the system." Outside, they could hear the heavy footsteps of Praetorian guards approaching. Ethan readied his weapon for what would likely be their last stand. "How long until your broadcast reaches the fleet?" he asked Vextar. "It's already streaming," the philosopher replied. His upper limbs moved across the controls with incredible speed. "I'm sending everything the truth about our history, about the Devourer, about the General's lies. It will take time for everyone to understand, but the first step is done." Ethan moved to Susan's side. On her control screen, he could see a communications link opening. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Contacting your fleet," she said. "We need to stop them from attacking now that the virus is working." With a final command, she opened a channel to the human resistance fleet. Ethan leaned forward and spoke clearly. "This is Commander Ethan Reeves' Operation Last Light. Mission parameters have changed. I repeat, mission parameters have changed. The Jiraxian fleet is being neutralized through targeted virus deployment. Stand down and await further instructions." There was a long pause, then a crackly voice responded. "Commander Reeves, this is Admiral Carter. Confirm authentication code Alpha 7 Delta 9. Ethan recited the code he had memorized before his mission began. There was another pause.